Hello and welcome to On the Money. My name's Mark Johnston, Show Director for Money Next. In a moment, we're going to introduce you to our wonderful panelists. But to start with, a little bit of housekeeping. Now, this is a live panel discussion, so it's your opportunity to get questions in front of our speakers. Don't be shy, join this discussion, get involved. On the right-hand side of your screen is your interactive chat panel. The first tab on there is the Q&A function. That's where you can pose your questions to our speakers. Now, the second tab on there is the Ideas tab. That's where you can add comments to anything you hear this morning. Now, I'd just like to invite you all now just to take the opportunity to add a comment up there. Say good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are in the world today. Let us know your name, where you're dialing in from. Okay, right, let's introduce our wonderful panelists. We have Adri Perkasthaya of BNP Paribas. We have Mark Towler of NatWest. We've got Sarah Wrench of Avanade. We've got Simon Pink of IBM. And our audience champion, in the corner of our audience, we have Mr. Chris Owen of Capgemini. Chris will be bringing all the questions in from the chat into play for today's discussion. Okay, so today's discussion, big data, big opportunities. How data and AI are driving disruption across financial services. Now, our first question of this discussion today, which areas across financial services are we seeing tangible and impactful AI use cases? Mark, welcome to On the Money. If I could invite you to let us know what you think of that first, please.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me. Good afternoon, everyone. In regards to NatWest, where we're seeing big impactful cases is in regards to our chatbot Cora. So throughout this year, she's had over 7.5 million conversations. Probably one of the biggest things we're able to support customers with has been in regards to COVID-19. So during the first lockdown around March, April time, when a lot of people were furloughed, we were able to help support these customers. So within, inside of 2 days, for example, we managed to put live a journey for our customers to get support in regards to paying the loans. And so where we see AI having a big impact is being able to, very quickly, bring these journeys live, support customers where needed, and if customers do need to speak to a human, they're able to. But what we can do with Cora is, take these conversations, we can, if you will, triage these conversations, make sure they get to the right department quicker. If they need to go to a department, be able to handle simple queries, and also looking into RPA, so robot process automation. What journeys are out there that we can automate for customers. So that's where we're looking at in terms of huge AI cases. For ourselves is where we can make things simpler and better for the customers.
Mark, it's great to have some first-hand experience on our panel from the user perspective. Adri, I wonder if I direct that to you. Some thoughts from you on some ways in AI use cases, please.
Yeah, so thanks. I echo the chatbot use case. It's been, I would add to it more so on the internal use cases. We have been using chatbots across multiple functional areas across the institution. Portfolio management, trade settlement, order routing, then derivative pricing. I sit in group risk, so sort of the use cases are across investment banking, retail banking, and the other businesses we have. Also, a lot of use cases around risk management. So you can think about anti-money laundering, then fraud detection, cyber fraud detection. So multitude of use cases. The most efficacious ones are around cyber fraud management from my purview.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that, Adri. Sarah, if I could bring you in, welcome to On the Money. Your thoughts on this, please?
I think the rest of the gentlemen highlighted some great examples, you know, and what is leading back to is really improving that customer experience. So when we think about why we're using the chatbots, it's because during COVID, banks were inundated with messages. So customers were feeling, you know, distressed and frustrated that they couldn't reach people. So by having something that provides 24/7 service enables them to therefore connect to the bank and improves their user experience. But equally on the internal perspective, using things like RPA or robotic process automation can help alleviate the pressure on like the employees to do manual processes. And that could be anything from automating regulatory tasks. We've seen the spike in changes with regulatory things from the FCA and across the ECB. So therefore the banks are then required to keep up with it. So the power of using technology to enable to improve not just the employees' experience, but the customers is really the strength we're seeing.
Great, thanks, Sarah. I think before we come to you, Simon, then we'll just cross over to Chris. I think there's some questions and stuff on the chat. Chris, if I bring you in at this point.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, and the question's for Simon, so I think it flows quite nicely. And I was wondering, Simon, so we've heard some good use cases around things like chatbots, RPA. There's kind of automations that seem well trodden now. But looking forward to the next wave of technologies, what are the things on the horizon, I guess, that you think banks and fintechs and entrants to the market should be looking at in terms of automation and big data that are maybe that next step along from bots and RPA?
So thanks, Chris, and thanks for everyone for having me here. So I echo the comments and the observations from the rest of the panel here. I think as we start to look to the future, so chatbots have still got some way to go. I think what's been exciting about them over the last few months is the pace at which they've been adopted across the different channels that the guys here have described. I think as we go into that, it's around about personalization. So how do we start to personalize these chatbots and address personal needs of the individual? And so keen to see how that develops as I guess one example towards that question that was just thrown out there.
Okay. Sure, that's great. Thank you very much for that, Simon. Thanks so much, Chris. If we move on then to our next question, I think then, guys, just a quick note to our audience that this is a live discussion. Great opportunity to get your questions in front of our wonderful panelists. Please use the chat function that I described. Please keep your comments coming in for your audience members as well. Thank you. So, next point of discussion. How important is consumer trust in the continued journey of AI usage and big data processing? Adri, if I come to you first with that particular question, please.
Thank you, Mark. So very important. Actually, the program which I focus from a group is around responsible, trustworthy AI, ML, and automation. And then if you unravel that, we are looking into privacy technologies, privacy enhancing technologies, whereby if we have historical data for some customers, how do we use it responsibly? And then if we have sort of AI, ML enabled decision making, and if you're transpiring that across a large population of the customer base, how do we remove bias, any mistakes, and so on and so forth? So it's on a high level principle and also on a high level helicopter view, we are moving towards incorporating trustworthy, responsible AI at the beginning. Some projects obviously on flight, so we are actively, approaching that throughout the bank, throughout the institution. So that's definitely important. And then personally, I see for a user of builder of AI and for a user of AI, if we are not able to articulate the approaches and the underlying technologies that has been used to our customers on a level where they are happy with the outcomes, then the trust factor will go. And financial services at the core are arbiter of trust. We keep money for some time and we manage risk around it. So if we don't have that, then we don't have any currency. So that's the key part of the program.
Thanks very much, Adri. I think there was there's a lot of nodding heads from our panelists there, all in agreement. Mark, if I come to you, anything to add to what Adri's just said?
I said absolutely in complete agreement. If you don't have the trust of the customer, then there's nothing to do. I wouldn't be in the job that I'm very fortunate to be doing. It's when you're designing journeys in terms of a chatbot, you need to think about how do I make sure that this serves every customer and serves them well. So whether that's from a data point of view, a privacy point of view, or even an accessibility point of view. So say for example, okay, I'm using images. This will be fine for some customers, but some customers who can't see, who are struggling to see the images, what can I do to make that journey just as good for them? Making sure that we are, including all the customers and in every ability into the customer journeys.
Great, and Simon, if we bring you in at this point as well, then Simon, your thoughts, please.
Yeah, so I think as custodians of this customer data, I think comes great power and responsibility, really. And the way that we look at this trust piece is in two parts. There's the responsibility around there's the trust, and then there's the ethics. So what we do with the data and how we handle it, we can govern it, the management, the privacy issues, we do all that. We can put some practical controls. Then there's the ethics of should we use it, and are we using it in a ethical way? And that, what we're seeing in many aspects of life, particularly in the world of financial services, it's very heavily regulated. And we're all about standards and policies and frameworks. Ethics isn't quite there yet, and ethical AI is not quite there yet. I think I'm seeing a number of financial institutions create papers, create points of view, and create some governance principles here. But how we implement that, how we bed that into the culture of our organisation, remains a challenge, and something that we're keen to address and keen to help with. And there are different factors that we can bring into play to support that.
Thanks, Simon. I just wanted to pick up on the point you mentioned there. You mentioned ethics, and I know, Chris, you've got something to add on that, please. A question you've got on ethics.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. We've had a question in from the website, and so it sort of builds on the point there on ethics. And I guess to Sarah, what they're considered ethically, not just from a customer point of view, but also to employees in terms of there's potentially a huge impact on the roles that employees will have with banks as AI becomes more industrialized. How should organizations approach that?
I'm a huge advocate for training, someone who's continuously learning and through self-learning and through studies. So I think there's something called creating shared value. It's where a business can profit but also like help society. So I don't know if many people are familiar with it, but also what's being used is ESG, like environmental social governance as well. Now it's slightly different, but the core themes kind of running through are like, even when the business is profitable, it has to look, well, how is it helping society more broadly? So whilst businesses might be benefiting from the automation, they need to be thinking, well, how does this impact their human workforce? And how does it impact the wider community? So, we talked about, biases, the impacts of AI. You have to think, well, who is the team building it? Is it all the same demographic of people, or is it actually a diverse team? How do we get the same levels? How do we get 50-50 gender equality, and not just gender equality, but actually equality across all the different minorities? It's really important to be thinking about how we change the dynamic, because bias is everywhere, but we have to make sure it's actually not embedded in the systems we're coding and building. And equally alongside that, we have to have legislation in place. We have GDPR to protect the customer data. So we start to explore things like data monetization. How are we thinking about what the customer's concerns are rather than the monetary aspect? So there's a huge so many discussion points I could take down, but tying it back to the initial one of the employee, I would definitely be saying, well, for every company, they should have a scheme in place. And we're seeing this across the board. Certainly at Avanade, all employees have access to Microsoft Learn and training. And actually, these courses are free and accessible to everyone. So if anyone after this call wants to have access to it, please let me know, and I'll happily post on LinkedIn, because the key part here is making it accessible and training people for the future. And we're seeing how the demographic is changing.
That's great. That's a really fantastic, Sarah. We probably have a whole show on the themes there. They're brilliant. So I'm going to one more question from the chat group, and I'm going to pass it over to yourself, Mark, if that's okay. And it sort of combines our first two questions, and it's really around, we've talked about some of the impacts that AI has had on a very practical, scaled level in the organizations, and then how you measure that customer trust. Like, when you've been using the AI tools and use cases, what are the kinds of measures that you put in place to make sure that it is working, it's delivering value for you, for your customers, and your employees?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, in terms of how we measure it for customers, so we look at what's called CSAT, which is based on the customer satisfaction score. You know, how are customers rating the journeys? We also look at containment. So, are these journeys contained? So the customer's been able to do whatever it is they want to do from A to Z, on the chatbot. If we've had to hand off, is that right? We've handed off. Is it what we call a process handoff? So actually, it can't be done via the chatbot at the minute for whatever reason. So we've handed off to another department. We also do deep dives in terms of, what journeys are working, what are high volumes, what are customers feeding back on these. Having a look at, how the customers are using these journeys and what we can do to improve. And that's the key thing from there. In terms of staff, I say they use it, themselves as customers or to demonstrate it to customers. So what we do then is an education piece just to explain, what Cora is, what journeys Cora can do for customers, what we're bringing in the future. So then staff can talk to customers about what else Cora can do for them, and just kind of give that trust that the data's safe. Everything that Corey's saying, is right. It's all there for them. Constantly feedback, and it is just one of those things where, wherever possible, talk to customers. So in pre-pandemic, one of the things I used to love doing was either listening to customers on phone calls, doing branch visits, and just getting a feel of what customers are asking, what customers are doing, and some of that would shift our focus. I say, a lot of customers are asking about X, Y, and Z, but we've been looking at doing A, B, and C. And we shift our focus in terms of, well, these are what customers are asking. Let's see what we can do to improve Cora from there.
Excellent. Thanks so much for that, Mark. We've had some good questions in. I noticed that we've had someone from Leicester tuning in and someone from Las Vegas. So from Leicester to Las Vegas, we're online today. If we move on to the next question, then, guys, to our panelists. Just a reminder, guys, get your questions in for our panelists. We've got them live here with us today. So add your questions to the interactive panel on the right-hand side of the screen. Look for the Q&A panel. Okay. So the next question: how is greater insight into customer behaviour and preferences driving both new opportunities and improved user experiences? Sarah, if we come to you first this time, please.
Well, I think we've kind of continuing a conversation. We've been talking a lot about kind of the impact that chatbots are having. So if we think about why they're being implemented, like obviously customers were frustrated, and I work for one insurance company where the company was losing about £6 million through customers choosing to change to another provider because they couldn't contact the staff. So after implementing a chatbot which enabled them to get in contact with them 24 hours a day, they then saw the savings on that, but also the customer experience improved. Now, if we think about the advanced analytics, not only can they then look at the chat conversations and understand, well, where is it failing? Is a customer annoyed because an internet connection keeps failing because their exchange is poor? You can actually then use all that advanced analytics to really understand why the customer is upset, what you can do to change that, and implement real actions. And I think there's lots of examples where AI is really changing this customer experience. Again, with the ability to use open banking APIs, you now have this 360 access to your different accounts. You can view it all in one place. And again, we're able to actually look at kind of monetization of data, but in a positive way for the companies, but also actually for the consumers, because they get a tailored customer experience. The thing that we're really trying to push for now is things like next best action. So when you're searching for a house, you don't want to have loads of house adverts pop up against you. What you actually want is then the best recommendations on the painters, the decorators. And really, by having that ability to opt in, if you want to have that experience where it's completely personalized and tailored to you, you have that ability to. But there are also, the regulatory side and the trust and compliance side where you also need the ability to opt out. So really it's up to down. You need that customization for each individual customer, depending on what they choose or what they want from it.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Sarah. Simon, I know you've got some more thoughts to add on this. If we come to you now.
Yeah, so I think on that customer experience, there's a variety of use cases we're seeing come through in the use of AI, and a few of them are landing quite solidly in production. We've touched on chatbots, and I agree group risk and compliance is a huge thing. I think the other thing is around insurance. I did some work with an insurance company relatively recently where we're helping around claims handling. And the problem we're trying to solve is that claims can be handled. You and I, we break our television falls off the wall or something, and we phone up and say, "Hey, our TV's bust." How that's then handled. There's a variety of different ways that can be handled, and the inconsistency of that handling takes time, costs money, and affects customer service. So by playing at AI, by looking back at similar claims in the past and how they've been handled, what they've gone on to cost, and the routes they've taken through the organization, we're able to help optimize that and ensure that actually that customer experience and that wait time from a claim is reduced to something that's actually a bit more digestible. If there's identifications of potential fraud, it gets to that team quickly. And then equally, it doesn't get lost in the system as it's moving from pillar to post between different assessors along that journey. So in that particular case, we had AI, we had machine learning models that were able to learn from the past and advise claims handling agents at that first notification of loss how best to handle that particular claim. And I feel that's has a positive impact, not just on the organization, but also for that customer experience here.
Okay, thanks so much for that, Simon. That's great. Chris, if we bring you back in at this point, I think you've got a few things to add, have you?
Yep, great. Thanks, Mark. So we've got a question for Adri, if that's okay. So just going to put a buzzword left for a second. So, just bear with me. We've got open cloud, event architecture, big data, all the hashtags you see on every post these days. They've opened up a whole host of new innovation opportunities for banks and for challengers and new entrants to do great things for customers. Now, there's a point of view that there's just far too many proof of concepts and far too few at scale implementations of these technologies. So from your point of view, what makes it so hard for incumbent large organizations and banks to get truly groundbreaking AI into prod?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and I'll thank you, whoever asked the question, for asking this. So most organizations don't think about, or most people, including me sometimes, don't consider the analytics for AI. So if you're just doing AI, what's the analytics imperative? Now there is analytics maturity model. You can look into, prescriptive, predictive, descriptive analytics. The key point is, does your organization really have leadership, analytics IQ or quotient? Do they have the intuition for analytics? Most of the data that has been captured historically is not an experiment. It's not an experimentation. So you don't have causal experiment happening there. So if you're trying to push the needle, make causal analysis based on historical data, you have to really have the quotient. And now AI, through to machine learning, statistical learning, are a way to, turn data into knowledge. However, if the business objectives, the business imperative, and the questions, the analytic questions are not clearly defined, not articulated, the finding will be wrong. It will not be based on data analytics, but it will be based on opinion, the loudest person's opinion. And so I think, as Sarah mentioned, that one of the key things is the talent development, where you've got from leadership through to the new joiners or people who are not in analytics functions to develop data science intuition, then move from best guess to evidence-based decision making, and then move from opinion to something which is analytically justified. So that's one of the keys, most important problem, and I've been partial to that mistake. when I thought my opinion is important.
That's a great answer, Adri. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And realize and actually industrialize these use cases. A couple of, there's some mechanics there around being able to access and use the data we've got, that find, understand, connect to the data that we've got in-house. And then there's the other end of the data supply chain of integrating it into that business processes. And again, we've done some work with, it's public knowledge, with Credit Mutuel in France to help them industrialize AI a little bit. And it does touch on things like culture and skills and organizational design. This team sport that we're in, this world of AI now, involves on so many skills. And again, how we bring in that whole team, the data engineers, the data scientists, the application developers, business analysts, all of that stuff, and how we're organized as a business now needs to change and shift. And that's what we're starting to see. We're moving away from that traditional linear kind of engagements that we used to have, where everything was kind of thrown over the wall. It would be everyone had a part to play, to something that's a bit more collaborative. And that seems to be working, this kind of scaling AI piece.
Systems weren't financially the best use of money and even environmentally friendly. Actually, the cloud-based system helps enable you to scale on demand and as per the need, and actually enables the processing power to carry out that advanced analytics. We have software like Databricks, which enables you to not only store and deploy the tables, but carry out taking it from kind of like a bronze, raw, messy data right through to a gold where you've applied data quality, and then actually deploy those models back into the environment in a scalable way, not just in one country, but actually globally. So the expansion of the ability of the different technologies available is enabling it alongside the cheaper processing power.
Some great builds. Thanks, Simon. Thanks, Sarah. We've got one more question on this space. I'm going to throw it to you, Mark, if that's okay. How are you seeing the role of cybersecurity and data risk compliance changing as more and more work starts to get automation either as its core or around the edges?
No, good question. I suppose not my area of expertise is cybersecurity, anything on that regard. I would probably say AI has a lot of opportunity in regards to that, spotting patterns that, for example, people not be able to spot normally. But with anything like that, I'll go off a conversation I had with one of my colleagues in cybersecurity who's very much, you do need the human touch. You do need to see, is this right? Is this normal customer behavior? Is this abnormal? Is it something that should be flagged, etc.? If it's done right, it can be done well. If not, it can cause a lot of undue stress for a customer. So I know I've had that impact at once. I was once shopping and spent quite a bit. Got a new computer, got some bought things for a holiday, and then ordering something online. Ordering a takeaway that night, and then that got flagged up as fraud. I always think back with a bit of humour for that one, because they might have spent however much I spent that day, but at least they couldn't order that £20 Chinese at the end of the day. So it is getting the system right if you are doing it. But no, good question. I just wish I could go into it a little bit more. But yeah, my knowledge is more on chatbots rather than cybersecurity side of AI.
Great, thanks so much for that, panelists. That was great, and thanks very much, Chris, for those questions that you posed in there. Right, we're into the final part of the discussion today. Just a reminder to our audience, get your questions in for our speakers. This is your last opportunity to do so. Right, final question. Is widespread AI usage and automation the future of financial services, or do we still need the human touch? Mark, we finished on you last time. We'll come straight back to you. Your thoughts on that, please.
Yeah, I'll kind of build on what I just said. I'm absolutely adamant. Obviously, there still needs to be human touch. Yeah, absolutely. This journey's out there where AI usage, automation is definitely the best thing for the customer. But do you just kind of switch it on, let it build a journey itself without taking into account all the different things you need to take into account? I'm quite lucky that I work in a team that is very diverse. so we can get all of that input from, from different people. Does this journey work? Have you considered this? Have you considered that? That potentially, if you just left the AI to it, it might not be able to do it. Same again with any kind of machine learning. You don't want to bring any kind of unconscious bias, into the machine learning model, because then that will just wipe out any customer trust you've got. So while absolutely I see AI growing, further and farther than what we could possibly imagine now, and seeing more journeys being automated, I still think that there does need to be a human touch, whether that's from the developer side to make sure they're happy with the journey before we go live, or certain journeys you might not want to automate, whatever those would be. So whether that be, for example, bereavement of a family member, you wouldn't want to automate that journey. You still want the human touch in that regard. So it's just having that initial thought before you do anything of, is this right for the customer? Is it better to be, if this is an automated journey, is it a chatbot? Or no, I think we need a human touch for this. So it's just having that thought process of whether, should we do it rather than could we do it?
So a very firm yes, I think, from you there, Mark. Simon, if we come over to you, your thoughts, please.
So yes and yes. Yes, this is the future of financial services, and yes, we will need a human touch. I can completely agree with that. I think we've got a lot of challenges ahead of us in this world. The technology is evolving and changing all the time, quite dramatically. How we absorb and adopt that is going to be down to the human design and the human intuition. And I think that needs a lot of careful planning. And we've touched on ethics. It's a huge topic, but we've got to make sure we're using this in the right way. We would always look to position AI as augmenting the human. And a variety of examples, and Mark gave us a few there where that's just essential. But actually, equally as a business, who controls the relationship with our clients? Is it technology or is it a person? And I think as a consumer, I want to deal with people. And I accept there's AI behind the scenes that's making that a better experience, a more seamless experience. But ultimately, people deal with people, and I think that will hold true for hopefully hold true forever and good.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Simon. Adri, we come across to you. Your thoughts? Yes to you. Yes from you as well, or contradict what your colleagues have said?
Yeah, I think obviously financial services are data rich. Historically, it's going to be more data rich. If you just imagine the market digitization of the capital markets, when there wasn't digitization, you were paper trading, there wasn't any data exhaust out of it, but now that's happened. Similarly, if you look into the space which is external data, alternative data, that space has increased because people there is fire hose of information that is coming out, and people are building financial services product out of it. So it's going to be important. I think the point is a human oversight of the AI, ML, statistical learning systems you've built in, automation is required. And then with the changing, products in the financial marketplace, there would be new technologies which will be requiring human to build new systems. So it's inevitable. There is going to be in some cases where the cost basis is cheaper to use machines. You will use machines, or which can't be done by human beings, possibly, because you can't really look into all your customer base and make a credit decision. You will use machines, but then how are you using those AI, ML algorithms for giving credit to people will be monitored by humans. For that you need to have a trust, ethic-based approach to automation and AI. Yeah. So long answer to the question that it's going to be increasingly important for financial services.
Great. Thank you very much, Adri. And Sarah, if we come to you, last but not least, your thoughts, please.
Yeah, so just, I guess, summarizing, in a way, I don't think we'll ever replace humans to cover, everything from the development to the risk and the governance. And so obviously as end users, we're using AI to improve our lives. So I think will always have a place because we're the consumer in that sense. But equally, we'll always have a role in governing it and checking for that, making sure it's actually benefiting us and we're using AI for good, really. And I think that's what we need to focus on, actually. How can we use it to maximize our output and our lives?
Thank you, Sarah. I think, Chris, you've got some points to bring in at this point as well on this score.
Yes, thanks, Mark. So I'm going to come straight back to you, if that's okay, Sarah. And I'm going to give you the chance to, A, contradict what said, and potentially play devil's advocate. So do you think there will be a place for propositions with no human contact, where it's potentially an add-on or a bolt-on where you have to pay more? Think, if Ryanair did bank accounts, etc., etc. Do you think that'll ever come, or do you think everyone will keep effectively this higher base of always having human contact as an option?
I think, if we take a really simple example like reinforcement learning algorithms on a robotic vacuum cleaner, do I care which way round the floor of my room the robotic vacuum cleaner goes? No, I don't. So I would happily leave that robot running around. But let's give the disaster example where, my son or daughter or my dog has dropped something on the floor and the robot goes over it. The robot isn't smart enough to sometimes avoid that and only then goes to destroy the carpet. You will then go and intervene. So even in the best case examples where we really do trust what it's doing or the algorithm behind it, or we feel there's no bias, there are extreme cases where we actually do need to intervene as a human. So from my personal perspective, and I've used a very simplistic example then, if you then think about the financial services, retail, hospitality, across the board, if you then take it a level up when it's deciding whether someone's given a loan or something far, far more complex where it could negatively impact a human's life, whether it's using, AI for medical devices or remote surgery. So to summarize shortly, I believe there'll always be a place for governance with human impact.
I'm hearing no. You don't think that's going to be the top idea. I won't be pitching it to you. That's a great answer. Thanks, Sarah. So I'm just going to put a question out there. We'll probably come to a couple of you, or anyone that wants to dip in, basically. So I'm looking for your top tip. So it could be a company, it could be an industry type, but who are going to be the people that come in left field and do awesome things in financial services powered by AI and big data, do you think, over the next 5 years? Who are the people we're going to be talking about that came in and did something amazing? So, who are your tips that come in and disrupt? So I've hoped enough there to give you all a chance to have a think and a decent answer. So you're looking most comfortable, Simon. So I'll come to you first. Who's your top tip?
That was not my comfortable look.
I can give a couple. I can build on a couple of examples if you want time, Simon. Unless you've got any to mind. So we've seen great companies like Darktrace, implement like cybersecurity solutions, and we're going to see a rise in companies like Banked, which is API providers for financial services. Because everyone had to move to online. Companies like Stripe, profits have soared. And whilst everyone might be thinking, oh, I need to buy the next Zoom or Microsoft Teams for video conferencing, actually, we're seeing that market, well, we've already got really strong players. It will actually be those ones that are providing something new and something niche that I really think will grow. But the core areas are obviously cyber. There'll be a growing trend and demand. And again, third-party financial APIs and services to improve customer experience across online trading and services. So that hopefully, Simon, I've given you enough time to think of your two or three.
Yeah, I said it better myself. I completely agree. I think no. So the essence of your point is really true, isn't it? Because if I knew who was going to be the next disruptor, then I'd be investing my money there, and hey, it would be great. It's the ecosystems I think we're going to start seeing emerging now. So how we all start to collaborate with these different technologies, because we're going to get some really niche specific, incredible technologies. We've got the likes of quantum coming on, quantum technologies from a variety of different providers. So how's that going to come in? The ability to identify patterns and then stitching some AI or some machine learning in that particular world. There's combinations here that fathom belief at the moment, and so kind of trying to pare it back a bit. I think we're going to see more collaboration across disparate parties to create some really compelling outcomes for us as consumers and for us as our businesses, frankly.
I've actually just thought of 3 more companies. Adri and Mark, have you got some otherwise on list?
I was going to say we'll give Mark and Adri the chance to. And I'll get my trading app open whilst they're doing it. So Mark, do you want to go next? What's your sort of areas of interest? Where might where are you looking for insight and innovation coming in the next few years?
I'll say it's a good question. I'll say that it probably echoes a bit what Simon mentioned. So I'll say quantum is probably got to be the next big thing. I mean, I don't think we even going to know how that's going to impact, but I think over the next 5 years, use cases for that, even if it's just proof of concept, of what can be done. I think, I'm not aware of any companies out there at the minute, but I think over the next, probably 5-10 years, quantum computing will be something where we think, for very much people who are not looking to, where has this come from? Obviously, IBM, Google, Microsoft, they're all doing wonderful work, to try and get into that. So I think something from there, whether there'll be a startup who takes that research, it's all it's all out there, it's all open, for anyone to read and be confused by, if anyone's like me with that, and just come out there, come from nowhere as it might seem. So that's where no companies I can think of, but that's where I think over the next 5-10 years we'll see major strides in and be a huge change to the computing landscape.
Cool, thanks, Mark. Finally, to you, Adri, any sort of builds, things you want to sort of throw in, curveballs?
I was thinking, actually, there are many companies which we know of, which can be great big. Stripe, very interesting value prop.
I think we're done after this.
So, yes, can you hear me? You can, okay. So the answer to that question is what we think will be the next big thing will not be mostly the next big thing, in my opinion. So it will be definitely the case, mostly the case. But whichever company becomes successful will have customer at the center. So there'll be customer centricity. That's going to be at least static. So I think if you want me to pick like 1 or 2 companies, I will say Stripe is big, Carta is big, which is in the equity markets, on the existing fintech proposition. On AI, ML, it is not going to be one winner, in my opinion. Maybe on the hardware space, yes, NVIDIA. But it's a very interesting question. I love to answer this, but I don't want to comment widely.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Thank you for that question, Chris. Obviously, everyone, really enjoyed answering to that. So it's great. Thank you so much. Okay, on that note, guys, it's time for us to draw the panel discussion to a close. I'd like to thank our speakers today, to Adri, to Simon, to Sarah, to Mark, and to our audience champion, Chris. Thank you very much for your time. Cheers, guys. Thank you for that. Thanks very much to you as well at home or at work, wherever you are in the world viewing. We really appreciate your input, and we really appreciate you taking the time to view On the Money today. Now, next week, we have Money Next Summit, a focus on the North American markets. As part of the Money Next channel, you get access to this. Please do join us for that. 3 days, the 8th to the 10th of December. Do tune in for more of the same. That's it from us. Make sure you subscribe to our channels. You'll see clips and highlights all the way through. Thank you very much for viewing, and we look forward to seeing you in 2021. Thank you very much.